Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to the show. Hey, that's me. That's me on the thing. All right. So, welcome to Step Back Today, a day show I do. I just gotta get my notes up. So, this is a show I do every Monday. I do 2 streams a week. This is the one I do at a time that is friendly for the Europeans and those on the other side of the Atlantic. So I take a chunk out of my lunch break, and a little bit more than a lunch break, I would say. But I get and hang out with some people, have some laughs, have some tears, and all sorts of wonderful stuff. And I get to hang out with you folks. So hello, everyone. Hi. So let's see. Who's in the chat? Is there anybody new? Is there anybody who it's their first time in the chat? I would love for you to make yourself known because we are a friendly community that likes to welcome new faces anytime someone shows up. Anyways, welcome to Step Back Today. We're having a good time. Hello, GBH. So, before we get started, there's a few fun things we could talk about. First of all, I did not know this until very recently, but I found out that I'm on breadtube.tv, which is a site that tries to collect breadtubers, which I was surprised by because I was under the distinct impression that I was not considered a breadtuber by most people. I thought that I was considered a terrible liberal, so whatever, you know. So yeah, that was a nice thing to find out. Another thing is I've had some conversations this week about Destiny, specifically about how Destiny is bad. I had a long conversation about how on Twitter about how Destiny doesn't really know what he's talking about, which I think everyone is pretty well aware of. But the Twitter conversation was very much about why online debates are limited in their scope and why they can't be very productive. And I mean, I think so, especially the way they do debates, that debates are typically framed on the internet. The fact that they're framed as if they are a WWE SmackDown event where it's going to be, 2 people go in and someone's going to win the debate and destroy someone's ass with facts and logic and that kind of shit. And I think that is a situation that is completely untenable as like a way to have a healthy discussion and walk away with any sort of progress being made in that debate. So that's something that I'm pretty grumpy about. On top of that, I had my own little conversation about the financial incentives involved, which is that we as YouTubers are not people who have a public presence, especially in political arenas and online stuff. So people who post my stuff or people who are in these online spaces and make their living off of them are slightly screwed by the financial incentives involved, because typically our funding options, things like Patreon, things like AdSense and subscribers and all of those things, are all tied to the audience that we have pre-built agreeing with the things that we say. And so we are literally financially incentivized to preach to the choir, as it were. And if you're not intellectually honest when you look at that calculation, you're not going to make the decision to make the hard financial decision to change your mind, which means that, geez, these glasses. which is bad in the sense that hopefully most people would be a little bit more of a grown-up about it, but there are some dishonest people out there on the internet who don't care about quote-unquote the discourse, and so they would never make the decision between financial, like, you know, their financial situation and being intellectually honest. And so in my mind, I think that people like Destiny, but also people like Carl Benjamin and a lot of the Crowders, the Rubens, those people just don't have any sort of, these glasses just cannot get clean. One second, I'm gonna use a different thing. They just cannot. They will not make that decision. And even for people on the left, it would be a difficult decision. Like, I don't anticipate I'm going to have my world rocked in the near-term future about some of my fundamental beliefs, but I know that if I change them, that without a little bit of an introduction, I would definitely be... I definitely could be vulnerable to taking financial losses if I were to significantly change my political opinion. There's the whole validation gang aspect. I think that it's less prevalent on the left. Well, who knows? I think actually it might be more prevalent on the left because the left are so dogmatic and divided over methods and things like that the right don't do as much. But definitely crossing the aisle on that would be very definitely more complex. You look really different without glasses. Yeah, I've got beady little eyes and a thick brow, so I look like a caveman. That's why I'm glad I have glasses. I was at one point considering getting what's it called? Contact lenses. But for some reason, my eyes are really squeamish. And so I couldn't poke myself in the eye anyway. And I think that I look better with glasses than without those things. Yeah, I don't have very much interest in... if I were to debate Destiny, I would probably take a very different tack than many of the others have. I don't exactly know. I don't think I'm famous enough to ever get invited to such a thing, but I have a different method of debate than I think most people. But yeah, I don't like the idea of seeing debates as like, you have to win. It's about... because like the thing is, there's two different ways of looking at debate. And for some reason, we've been mired down in the right-wing concept of debate, because it's the right-wing concept of debate that sort of controls narrative or controls a lot of political conversations, especially political debates, where the idea is to go there and display certainty and display show that you're morally certain and show actions of strength, so that people will in your base think that you won and you've defeated the enemy. And like, that's not conducive of a good debate. I think that results in two people talking past each other and not really coming to any sort of actual grown-up conversation. And so far, I haven't seen a streamer or anybody who regularly hosts these debates in any way interested in having a grown-up debate like that. So, in my mind, that's why I am not super duper interested. And if Destiny were to ask me to do a debate, I would have some words. I would want to frame the debate in a certain way that I think that Destiny wouldn't like, because it probably wouldn't make for as good TV. So, there's that. Next thing I have mentioned is last week I played Dread, which is definitely a role-playing concept. It's a role-playing game that I had never tried before, but instead of dice, it uses a Jenga tower, and it's meant to create tension and fear, which I found out about because the creator of this game follows me on Twitter. And so I tried it out, and we had a lot of fun. I also went on a rant about Wikipedia lately, about how I want to make I have like a bunch of videos I want to make for a channel that wouldn't fit on Step Back. And I have no idea when I'm ever going to make any of these videos, because I feel like any moment I'm spending not making Step Back videos is wasted time. But here I am. So I keep making the video. All right, so I have these video ideas that I want to make, and one of them will probably be about Wikipedia and about how Wikipedia is secretly super, super awesome, and we don't give it enough credit. We don't give it the credit it deserves. So, there is that. Patreon, for anybody who is interested in this, Patreon has recently implemented Vimeo integration in such a fashion that looks like I'll be able to upload videos that just patrons can see and not have to worry about uploading unlisted videos and all that kind of stuff, which is great because I've been wanting to do premieres for my videos more regularly. But premieres and the Patreon stuff I do about trying to release videos early for patrons have clashed. And now I can not only put videos up for patrons early, so you can see them early, but I think I can also now say I'm going to make, if I ever have a sponsorship, I'm going to make a sponsorship-free version of the video that I will put up for patrons. So that's fun. And at the moment, to give an update on the kind of content I am making, after this stream is done, I'll be going into my cave and working on my next video. I've now written it. It's done. It's been shot. I shot the video on Sunday. Or no. Yeah, I shot it on Sunday. I have filmed it. It's done. So now I have to go into editing, which I have been doing. I've been getting into. So we'll see what happens with that in the near-term future. A lot of people talking about guests and debates and collaborations with people. I've made it very open that I am totally interested in working on collaborative projects or being a guest on anyone's podcast or YouTube video or whatever it is, but no one reaches out to me, so it is what it is. But anyways, on the video I'm working on right now, I'm working on a video for the religion series on Shinto, which I want to have done by Tuesday or Wednesday for patrons, which means that my hope is that it will be out on Thursday or Friday for everyone else. Depends. It's another sponsorship with Skillshare, so Skillshare has to look at it and approve it before it goes out, so there's that. Okay. And also, and I think I'll talk about this in the Tuesday stream because we've already been going on for a bit, but I'm going to write in here to talk about post-capitalism, which is a book I read. I have finished. Okay. So yeah, hopefully we'll see some Shinto later this week. Okay. Damn it, Bobby 420 says, Step Back collabing with the Surfs when? Whenever the Surfs reach out to me to do something. If something ever comes to mind that I'm like, oh shit, the Surfs, they would fit really well into this project, then I'd probably reach out to them. But that hasn't come to mind yet because the last couple videos I've been working on have had very tight deadlines. So maybe it's which doesn't give a lot of time for breathing for things like getting collaborators on board. But I know that the Surfs often gets guests and stuff like that, so maybe I would love to join in on that. But that's imposing, and I don't want to impose. What do you think of Orson Welles? I think Orson Welles had very good critiques of authoritarianism. I think that Orson Welles is a really great thinker, a really great writer, and I think one of the most abused authors of the 20th century by the right, who have no idea what 1984... There's so many people who have probably never read 1984 who use Orwell's discussion of language and ideas and things like that in a way that makes zero sense. Specifically, the biggest thing that sticks out of my mind is that in 1984, one of the things that's like prevalent is like newspeak, and this is the kind of thing that the right tries to point to, which is that when you tell people to not be racist, somehow you are censoring language, and that is just like the authoritarian government in 1984, which is weird because if you read the book, one of the major things that's going on is that the censorship, the way that the state censors, is by taking away words, like by removing words from the dictionary and making this sort of newspeak, which is this way of removing one's ability to... Oh my God, I make this mistake all the time. George Orwell and Orson Welles. Well, I'm going to finish my George Orwell thing, and then I can get into Orson Welles. This is a mistake I make all the time, and I have no idea why, but it is a thing I do a lot. So the idea of removing words and such is problematic, I would say. Like the idea of so in 1984 they're removing words so that you can't have the language to dissent against the state, while usually they're complaining about the rise of using new words to expand the way that we think about things. So it's so weird that they refer to Orwell when we're talking about new things, when we're talking about new language being used to redefine gender, to talk about gender relations, talk about race relations, and all of these things. But then the people who've obviously never read 1984 are then complaining about how us introducing new words to explain new ideas and discouraging the use of slurs and ways that discourage interrogation into new ideas and new modes of being, those are somehow that's somehow Orwellian, and I think that is ridiculous. Now, Orson Welles is another interesting figure. First of all, I've just got to I should have done this before the stream, but it's starting to bug me as I have a headache, and so I'm going to take some Advil while I talk about Orson Welles. Okay. So, Orson Welles, great filmmaker, interesting political figure. So he's responsible for a couple things, which I think are interesting. First thing that comes to mind is he was part of a radio theater group back before the days of television, where he was one of the people who did the infamous War of the Worlds broadcast, which historians have looked at, and me as a historian of communication technology have looked at a couple times. And it has, it's obviously that whole very convenient story that people took it literally has sort of fallen apart in the decades since the myth about the War of the Worlds broadcast happened. But the myth of the War of the Worlds podcast, I think, gave Orson Welles a kind of very, gave him some cachet. And he was involved in all sorts of projects over the years. And I think that the number one thing that he gets remembered for is the 1945 film that he wrote, directed, and starred in, which is Citizen Kane, which I've watched for a film history class. And I would actually argue that Citizen Kane is pretty awesome. I know that it's kind of cliche. It's like a cliche thing because I think in the top 100 films of the 20th century or something like that someone made, that some publication did at the end in 2000, they said Citizen Kane was the greatest film of the 20th century, and I think that it was a pretty good movie. A lot of people have pushed back against that given title of greatness to Citizen Kane, but I actually thought it was legitimately good. So if you ever have an opportunity, definitely try watching Citizen Kane. It is a great movie that shows how wealth and privilege can turn somebody, can corrupt somebody to commit horrible acts, or to be a kind of terrible human being, and how money alienates us from other people. Okay. And then, of course, everyone knows that Orson Welles had a less than gracious life after that. If I remember correctly, I don't know if he ever got into addiction, but he definitely got into red meat. He started running out of money, and so he started doing more and more like low budget, crappy things just for the cash. I think one of the most infamous ones was what was it? He did a frozen peas commercial, which I think people have parodied many, many times. And then I think the last film he did before he died was the Transformers movie, which is a movie I haven't seen, but it just shows like they went from Citizen Kane to Transformers. But I think that he is definitely a pioneer when it comes to the media of the 20th century. And I would argue that he's one of the great storytellers of the 20th century that we have that should be missed. So that's my George Orwell and Orson Welles. So there you go. And then you also learned a little bit about me. You know that screwing up Orson Welles and George Orwell is actually like a thing that I embarrassingly do a lot, and I have no idea why. What's a better method of battling ideas than debates? All right, damn it, Bobby420, which, by the way, objectively the best username. I think that disparate ideas. So, okay, there's a couple things. One, you should definitely put a hard line on things that you think are worth debating. Debating the basic human rights of people is not, in my mind, worth debating. So, like, in my mind, debating, like, the alt-right, you have to approach in a very specific way. But here's how I would debate somebody like a Destiny or somebody from the far right. And that is, I know that we don't see eye to eye on issues that we both think are extremely important. That's something that you walk in the debate knowing. So, you want to try and convince them to maybe not agree with you, but understand how you came to where you are, and at the same time try to understand how they came to where they are. So this would be a lot of, instead of, yelling at each other or responding to points and having the exact same conversations that we've been having for literally centuries in some cases. And instead, trying to get to the core of what people have. Because a lot of people have some universal things I think we can all be okay with. For example, I think that most people want to have a happy and prosperous life for everyone. Who they emphasize, how they think that is possible, obviously differ wildly. The things that they ignore, the things that they lean on, what they consider part of that circle of people they want the best for, are all different. And so if I were to to debate destiny or something like that, I would ask him, because he's a vehement defender of liberal capitalism, I would ask him why he thinks the way he does. Why do you like capitalism so much? What is your idea of capitalism? Why do you think that a system a system like this is going to push the world into a better place? And I had try to get some kind of conversation between us, and try to get to understanding. And so I would say, if Destiny were to debate me, I know what's worse than debating Destiny, which is having a long conversation theorizing how you would debate Destiny. 'Cause I'm pathetic. So I would put ground rules, which is that I would want us to listen to each other. And if Destiny refuses to listen to me, then I would be more focused on trying to hear how he comes to his sort of thinking. And I realize that in a lot of cases, he's not going to be incentivized to change his opinion, because he knows that if he becomes a rampant socialist, he's going to lose a lot of his viewer base. So what I would do in his case is get him to get to the core of why he believes the things he believes, and then simply ask him questions, leading questions off from there. If he talks about capitalism, there's a lot of various reasons why a logical person would believe that capitalism is good. And then take those points one by one, take the ones that he thinks are very important, and try to walk him through why I disagree with those points, and go to the very core of it. And hopefully, by doing that, one, the conversation be a lot more civil. Two, even if we don't walk away agreeing with each other, we can both walk away understanding each other a little bit better. And then maybe, just maybe, sow some seeds that he can think about later, and sow some seeds for his audience that they can think about later. I do think that when we frame politics in the framing of warring factions, that it benefits those who have the pre-built tribe, the centrists, the conservatives, even the fascists, even the radical leftists. It makes you feel more comfortable in your position. But when it comes to growing people who agree with your position, you are just as likely to create more dragged down in the ground enemies, because of how our brains are so wired for tribalism, that it's not going to progress the cause anymore to treat them like they are some sort of irredeemable enemy. And so I would try to, in said debates, try to break down their attempts to put you in a box. And try to also show that you are willing to see them as a complex person as well. And hopefully come to a form of understanding that then can be the basis to build on something together. I know that feels so weak and so beta cuckoldry or whatever you want to say. But I think that the way that we frame online debate right now is so all or nothing. It's so masculine. It's so like we must battle until someone wins. And I think that gets us nowhere. And so I'd be very interested in making sure that on making some sort of progress. Who knows if that would go anywhere? Because I'd have to overcome their attempts to put us in a box. And some people have some pretty hard boxes. Like, there are some people who are very dead set that they're going to dismiss socialist ideas for various reasons. Either they are very propagandized, or they've been hardened by fights on the internet, or they've gone down a dark rabbit hole of right-wing conspiracy theories. And in those cases, it's going to take a long process of trying to unpack all of that. And one that I imagine many of those people, especially in our internet age, would not have the patience for going through in like an hour or two. And I think that's probably why this wouldn't make for very good TV. But I'd be open to it. Somebody. Yeah. So that's my debate. That's my debate, the way I debate. Are there any instances of democratic admirations aiding violent regime changes? A liberal podcaster I normally like asserted that only Republican presidents do that kind of thing. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty ridiculous. Like, okay, the biggest one that I can think of, democratic person aiding violent regime change is the Vietnam War. That's the biggest one that comes to mind, with JFK and Lyndon B. Johnson responsible for that clusterfuck. There was the Iranian hostage crisis, in which President Carter tried to intervene with the Iranian hostages and didn't negotiate, so that led to issues. That's probably not the regime change you're going for. And then freaking President Clinton. Let's see, what was President Clinton's regime change? President Clinton led a terrifying economic blockade of Iraq, hoping that by starving the people of Iraq that they would somehow turn on Saddam Hussein and overthrow him, which led to the deaths of over 1 million people. There was the so like that. There are like I'm kind of drawing a blank right now about what the rest of the Clinton administration, but that's just the one that comes immediately to mind. Barack Obama expanded the war on terror from 2 to 8 countries with small warfare. If you're talking about like violent regime change there, I'm sure there's more that I'm not thinking because my brain isn't exactly working on all thrusters right now. I have a nasty headache that I'm trying to power through, but yeah, it's not only Republicans. There is definitely a bipartisan consensus on these things. Oh no. I think I hear a cat throwing up somewhere. Maybe this is the wrong stream to ask this in, but I find drawing background/perspective really difficult. I basically only draw characters. Any tips? I don't know how to draw, so I can't really say anything. Oh yeah, Libya. There's definitely Libya with Obama's administration. Next question. I heard a different liberal podcaster claim that a public option would eventually lead to health insurance disappearing. Agree or disagree? Yes, I do agree that, it's not necessarily, we have, so like the public, okay, so to kind of talk about health insurance and the different healthcare, because like America is going through this like obsession to find any possible answer using, because like with neoliberalism or everything like that, any possible market solution to fixing the fact that healthcare is not really a thing that responds to market forces. One of the options is to make what is called a public option, which is a government health insurance that you can sign up and you still have to pay premiums for, but that it would keep the minimum, like it could be a thing that anybody could default onto if they wanted to. And so it's a health insurance program that if there's no private option that you can afford, you can go to. Would a public option lead to health insurance disappearing? Probably not. I don't imagine that. I don't imagine that you would end up in a situation like that, because, like, the thing is, in a neoliberal model, they would never ever think about making that health insurance good. A public option in a private system still would be incentivized to austerity and privatization. So it sets up an organization to become yet another private institution. It's just not like it kind of is in the hands of a neoliberal state. It's a neoliberal program, and neoliberalism tends towards privatization and austerity and those kinds of things, which means that I don't think that would lead to the end of health insurance. Honestly, the end of health insurance is not sort of a thing that you're going to be able to do using like little nudges in the market system. It's going to be destroyed. Even if America had a single payer health insurance system, there would still probably be private insurance. I live in Canada, a country that has a single payer healthcare system, but there is still supplemental health insurance. It's still a thing that exists. It's not nearly the size of the industry in the United States, but you can still pay for health insurance for like nicer rooms and for comping medicine in some ways, and like all sorts of stuff like that. So even a single payer system wouldn't get rid of health insurance entirely. I would argue that we should, because I think that the idea that having money somehow means you deserve better healthcare is a travesty to human rights, but doesn't, necessarily mean. Did you watch M by Fritz Lang? It's impressive how he depicted the Volksgerichtshof. No, I have not watched that movie. Thoughts on the EU? The EU is a ambitious project. I think that there was, at some point, a very inspired idea about ending regional conflicts in Europe and making Europe a better place. And it has been completely subsumed by European banks, by neoliberal economics, and has led to some very crappy decisions, especially when it comes to the poorer countries in the European Union, that I do not agree with. I do think, though, as an institution, it's a better thing to have than to not have. I think that the European Union is something that needs to be changed but not discarded. And given the history of Europe, if you think about it, the European Union is probably one of the key things that have prevented several wars. Because thinking of Europe before the European Union, there was a lot of European war. And keeping the interests of France and Germany and the United Kingdom in the same boat has probably stopped a lot of needless economic tension and needless conflict. The EU is imperialist, but you think it should be there. I think that the EU, as the way it exists now, does create a form of financial hegemony that keeps Germany and France specifically powerful. And I think that needs to be dismantled. But do we go back? Does Europe want to go? Should Europe go back to having multiple currencies and no universal body between all of these states? No. I think that would be a disaster. Waiting for all of the chat to just say cat. Let me just get the cat cam ready to go. Oh, geez, no, never mind. It's grotesque. My Tim Hortons garbage can. Okay, so we'll just do this. Except that now I need my text. So, waiting for all the chat to just say cat. But, hello, girl. How you doing? All right. Let's see. Have you seen the channel Pop Culture Detective Agency? It's a feminist channel specifically about how masculinity is portrayed in the media. Yes, I have seen that. I think that that Pop Culture Detective Agency has had amazing videos. My two favorites that stick out in my head are the video on the Shawshank Redemption and the video on Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. The quiet, gentle masculinity of Newt Scamander is, I think, one of my favorite YouTube videos on the Pop Culture Detective Agency channel. And yeah, so this is Phoebe. For anyone who hasn't seen her before, she's in most streams, but this is one of my two cats. This is the old one. She's about, how old are you now? You're like 10? Yeah, you're about 10. Tristan, have you ever considered yourself a Trotskyist? No. I have some severe doctrinal differences with Leon Trotsky. I think that Trotsky having a left-wing critique of Bolshevism was a good thing, but I think that creating a vanguard Red Army that is just ready to spread communism to all corners of the planet was a recipe for disaster that would definitely not get anywhere. His hyper-violent form of socialism, I think, was a recipe for destruction. And the Bolsheviks showed the exact same thing as they brutalized their own people and colonized other countries like Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia and Poland and Yugoslavia, although Yugoslavia kind of broke, and Czechoslovakia and East Germany and all those. Like, I think that was also the reason for the Soviets' downfall. So I am definitely more of a I'm starting to get into this post-capitalism idea and thinking more of being a revolutionary reformer, which means that I do not think that wiping the slate clean and starting over again is exactly the way out, but I do think that using the things and institutions that exist today to transform into a radically new form are good ideas. I don't know. These ideas are very much in flux right now after reading Post-Capitalism, and I have to really sort out what I think about a lot of things these days. So we'll see where that goes. Who asked the question about drawing? It was Sir Zhao Zhao, I believe. A meta-creationist, he made a really compelling argument, such as the coelacanth living fossil that's been around for 410 million years that hasn't evolved compared to humans who have evolved. Well, Canadian Fuhrer Emperor Jackson, I mean, I don't want to explain how evolution works, but evolution does not necessarily mean that, well, there's two ways to look at the coelacanth story, which is one, the coelacanth is not a living fossil in the same way that, like, the term living fossil is a little bit of a line, if you will, and that the coelacanth of modern day is not necessarily the coelacanth of hundreds of millions of years ago. And it's more the fact that, like, how the crocodile as a body type has existed for hundreds of millions of years. And the shark as a body type, or as a type of creature, has been around for hundreds of millions of years. And I think that the important thing to mention on that is evolution's not a process of change for the sake of change. And that if conditions don't change in a way that fundamentally require massive amounts of evolutionary change, they don't necessarily have to happen. So if the coelacanth in the ocean doesn't have to change in significant ways for long periods of time, it won't. And I think that, like with sharks and crocodiles and things like that, that they've come across certain characteristics that are very solid, well-adapted systems that haven't needed massive change. And even then, they have changed quite a bit. A shark of the Cretaceous period there's no species of shark from the Cretaceous period that's still around today. And just like that, the coelacanth is a type of fish that has survived to modern day without needing significant changes. While, like, humans are the result of massive changes that happen in short periods of time because of the drying out of the drying out of the African savanna and trees basically turning into prairies, and a primitive form of ape trying to adapt without natural weapons to an environment where they were a lot more vulnerable and they couldn't just hide in trees. And so we had to develop a lot sophisticated forms of communication and cooperation. And evolution biologists have looked at things like punctuated equilibrium, which is an idea that evolution isn't like a constant rate of change thing, like a lot of people believe, but that evolution works by long periods of stability, relatively little change, followed by some sort of shock, some sort of change in condition that leads to a lot of big changes in a relatively short amount of time, evolutionarily speaking. And if you don't have one of those shocks, you're not going to change a super amount of time. That's it. So I don't think it's that compelling of an argument. Do you think that regions might adapt the EU's supranational model, the Middle East, Central America, and so on? Well, there are some. The African Union, which was a project of Colonel Gaddafi, but I think that is on path. I'm trying to remember. It's in the next couple years. Like I think maybe 2020 or 2021. There's supposed to be there's supposed to be a time, anyways, in the next few decades where the African Union is supposed to go onto a single currency. I don't exactly know when that is, but that is a thing that is in progress. And I think that very much, especially in countries where individually these countries have issues with more powerful economies outside of them trying to mess around with their individuality, that a supranational organization like an European Union would help a lot to give them a stronger bargaining position. Yeah. You seem to know a lot about evolution and natural history. Well, Sir Zhao Zhao, it's never been something that I've studied, but it's something I've been interested in. There was a period shortly after I dropped out of audio engineering school where I basically had a D- average in high school, and my post-secondary school I dropped out of. And so the plan was that I was going to go back to university. And I did not know what I was going to go back to university for. And one of the things that I was going through at that point was hearing a lot about, like, this was like 2007, about maybe early 2008. And I was kind of in a situation where I was thinking I would go to university and learn about, like, because 2007, 2008, that was when I was really into, like, edgy new atheism. That was when I got really interested in talking to creationists about their beliefs. And I think that for a little bit I was interested in maybe doing evolutionary biology. Oh no. Somebody on the floor above me is doing something with power tools. I apologize. I can't do anything about that noise. So I went to this adult education, self-directed learning high school for a few months where I was trying to upgrade my biology marks in high school and my math marks and things like that so that I could go to university for biology and become an evolutionary biologist. But I then kind of got, it just went nowhere. And I realized the process of getting all of the grades up that I would need to get up to go to university to do something like biology would be pretty intense. And so I dropped the project. So I do know a little bit about it because I had a passing interest in it for a while. But yeah, it is interesting. Because, like, the thing is, we think about evolution as, like, this progressive thing that's always changing things, but really it's always just adapting species to be just good enough to function. Like, look at humans. Look at the fact that humans, like, our bodies start falling apart as soon as we start getting to an age where in the past we've had children. So as soon as you start getting into, like, your late 20s, your body is on the slow decline towards death because you're no longer useful. It's all about maximizing your ability to reproduce. And so, us having intelligence, opposable thumbs, tool use, all those things was only naturally selected for in as far as it let us breed better than people who couldn't. And that just as successful, if not more successful than our strategy, is the mouse, which lives for like a year and has like 80,000 babies. That's an exaggeration, but has like dozens of babies and then dies like at 2. Like, if they're lucky. And so like that is a method. And so like I think that is interesting. And even then, it's not a logical model either, because then you end up in situations like where, like, if you look at living things at the microbiological level, because evolution is not designed, because it's not a intelligent process, it leads to all sorts of weird things that are interconnected in ways that make no sense. There are things like that have been repurposed in ways that are very confusing. So like I'm trying to think of a good example, like the coccyx, which is a part of the human body, specifically our tailbone, that's what the coccyx is, which started as an actual tail and now is more or less vestigial, except that bone and ligament being there has been repurposed, and now it has a whole lot of stuff to do with bowel control and all those kinds of things. So you can actually, you could probably, if you try, you can actually kind of flex it. So like that's like an example of like how weird evolution can be. Okay. Suppose we contacted an alternate universe where humans have achieved full post-scarcity communism. Would the conservatives of our world still find a way to insist communism doesn't work? Probably. I think so. Because conservatives already live in a world where the data shows that their ideas don't work. Climate change shows that climate change is a issue that the market and market forces are uniquely ill-suited for handling. Yet there's an insistence that the market needs to be used to solve it. And this shows, first of all, that that's a completely ideologically driven idea. And when you see things completely through the lens of ideology, yeah, you're going to look for the bad in every single thing that disagrees with your ideology. So yeah, that's it. So, do we have any more questions? That was the last question I had on my list. So please give me more questions. In the meantime, let me take a look at some of these things you've been saying in the chat. Population ecosystems. Well, that's awesome, GBH, that you're a biology teacher. So you probably could speak more to this than I could, especially since you studied population and ecosystems. Have you ever heard of that laryngeal nerve that runs down the heart first, even in giraffes? No, that sounds right. We have a bunch of weird stuff like that in our bodies that's like, it looks like something that's useless, and then we we do it and then we get rid of it, and it like has all these like negative effects that we didn't even understand. Like the fact that we're learning more and more that the vagus nerve, the nerve that goes to connects your brain to your stomach, is turning into something very, very important, I think is interesting. You skipped one of my questions. Well, I'm not going to go and dig back to find it, so just repost it. Thoughts on Hong Kong? I mean, the people of Hong Kong want democracy. The people of China want not democracy. So the Chinese are brutally repressing the people the people of Hong Kong, and I think that it is bad that they are doing that, and I would like for democracy to happen in Hong Kong. But I will say that I am not super well informed on these debates as they unfold, and I think that that's a big deal. I missed the early part of the chat, but heard you read post-capitalism. Is that really in any way different from social democracy? I think it is. Social democracy is more focused on using, social democracy is about bringing about socialism via like small reforms and electoralism, while post-capitalism is very much like the first, like one of the first things that is outlined in the book is that history, that that the state and using the state is one limited part of post-capitalism, and that yes, there are things in post-capitalism that have to do with government reforms, but there are also things that have to do with activism and building institutions outside of the state. The fact that the government, or the fact that post-capitalism speaks about actively withering the state and seeing a lot of these projects as projects with their own destruction written into them, as we push towards making the amount of work required to make the required commodities approach zero, is much better than what we think, or than the way that we then it's much more of a theory of change and a totalizing ideology than, say, a simple social democrat. I could see an argument saying that it's democratic socialism, but even so, it still has the withering away of the state in the wake of post-scarcity as a goal, which I think is beyond the scope of most democratic socialists and social democrats. And also, it is about making revolutionary change without the destruction and chaos of violent revolution, which is kind of flies in the face of revolutionary socialists as well. That's why it doesn't really fit in many of these categories. Hence why it's like a new idea, which is like, I think in our situation, I think is the most important thing, is that we need to be moving. If anything, a lot of the ideas and debates we're having are like centuries old, and we really need to be like pushing for new ideas. And I like a lot of the ideas in post-capitalism. Do American workers work more hours today or in the 1930s? How wrong was Keynes? People work... So, in the 30s, people weren't working very much at all because there was like rampant unemployment due to the Depression. But people had 8-hour workdays in the 1930s, which is a thing that we have today. I think that maybe when you speak about like hard work and like blue collar jobs, I think that it's about the same. The thing though is the big transition between a worker in the 30s and a worker of today is that a worker today has a much more permeous relationship between their work life and their personal life, in that a lawyer in the 1930s finished their work at the office and went home and then spent time with their kids and their family, and, you know, didn't have that same, they didn't have emails, they didn't have a phone, they didn't have like Slack, so they didn't have like all these things they were expected to be checking at all hours of the day or even when they're on vacation or anything like that. I think that that is a major difference between today and the past, and like the fact that in our modern day, pretty much everyone is working all the time, which is very detrimental to our psychic health. How wrong was Keynes? I don't know if Keynes was wrong per se. He definitely had an idea of economic development and restarting that worked for the period that it worked in. And then we're getting into like economic history. So like the part when people started to abandon Keynes was when a period of like what happened was Keynes got into this idea of growth through like creating debt to stimulate the economy. And in like the 1970s, because of like oil shocks and things like that, you had governments that were that were borrowing lots of money to maintain a whole bunch of things, to maintain like a lot of the benefits they were getting. Keynes predicted we would be working 3 hours a day by now. Well, that was wrong, because we've learned that we never moved to any way to like as if Keynes predicted that people like did not anticipate the globalization of manufacture. He didn't predict that that there are ways like that technology doesn't need to necessarily advance if there is cheap labor to do such a thing, because if you can pay somebody very little money to do a task, then there's little incentive to automate and improve on such a process. And that and also the financialization of the economy, that that once profit margins started to fall, that capital would move out of investment and move into the financial sector and kind of just hold up in that instead of actually investing in new projects. And Keynes, like if you look at it through that many times there is a preference for creating jobs that are pointless, as David Graeber would say, a bullshit job, rather than try and reduce the overall amount of labor. Are there any occurrences of historical empires decolonizing but still continuing to exist as a nation? The United Kingdom? That'd be a good one. France, Portugal, Spain. The people of China or the government of, I don't know. Okay, I think it was not a reference to anything I said. Do you think the use of the imperial system instead of the metric and the different level for different language the USA use in political conversation have to do with American exceptionalism? No, I just think it has to do with there's an insular nature to the way that Americans conceive of the world, where there's not much consideration of other countries and how other places do things and act. And so Americans don't typically think of other countries. When I got married, my wife is an American citizen and her family are Americans, and it was surprising how many of them needed to get passports. People like in their 50s and 60s getting passports for the first time so that they could come to Canada for a wedding. And it just kind of shows that, like, yeah, there's just a lack of interest in outside things. Or like the healthcare debate in America, where they're thinking about all these ideas for an issue that the rest of the world solved like decades ago. Which is interesting. So I do think it just shows an insular nature to American culture. And I can say that as someone who has a master's degree in American cultural studies. So, bleh. A legal podcast I listened to expressed sympathy for Chelsea Manning, but said the government can't afford to set the precedent that you can ignore subpoenas for a reason of conscience. Response? Fuck you. That's my response. What's it called? When you're choosing between doing the just thing and doing the legal thing, do the just thing. And if you're in a situation where the law is in violation of justice, then you are required to break the law. Or at least you are ethically compelled to break the law. And I don't really care about jurisprudence or precedent. That can all get fucked. All right. Do we have any more questions? I am listening. I'll take some more questions. I would be more than happy to, if you guys have run out of things to ask me for now, I am coming back tomorrow, and I do think that, I'm coming back tomorrow, and I could go to work on my video if you would like. Do you think military-based revolution inevitably leads to authoritarianism? Yes, I do. I think that doing a violent revolution, by doing it in such a fashion, you are creating, not through rational means, people who have a life or death vested interest in your downfall. And so even if you are a, active, like even if you do everything for all the right reasons, you have all the right politics, you can very much see that people build their identity in opposition to you, regardless of how you see how your politics are. And that, if you look at like the anti-communist ideas in places like Estonia, because of the legacy of the Soviet invasion, you can start to see why military uses and violent revolution are not long-term solutions to these problems, and that you're going to create your own enemies. All right, so you guys can't see this, but Phoebe is right here, and she's sleeping on my desk, and she's being very, very cute. And there's TVs sticking out, and it's adorable. What counts as unoccupied home, i.e. that we should give to the homeless? There's cottages in places like Devon that are only occupied like 10% of the year because people only go there in the summer. Yeah, sounds unoccupied to me. I am 100% focused on usage. And if there's a house that doesn't have people in it, put people in it. And if some rich asshole doesn't have a summer home anymore, like tough turds. My question about my desire to be simultaneously a blue-collar tradesman and a beatnik intellectual, is that a thing with precedent? Yeah. The working class, in like the 19th century and stuff like that, everyone thought that once you got into like scientific management and you reduced the work to mindless drudgery. Like there was this period in the 19th century where a lot of the factories had they would split the jobs into a bunch of small parts that you could very easily train someone on doing, and it became very mindless. And they were pretty sure that this would lead to the people working in these jobs to become these like mindless drones, too dumb to take care of themselves, and would just do this mindless work. But what these people did is developed a working class culture. They would sing songs. They would have poetry and philosophy and political theory read to them. Very often in like some of these factories, people would pay kids to just sit there and read them books of philosophy, books of things. Like there's like a strong working class culture that developed in that period. And I think that there is definitely something to be desired about being part of a blue collar working class culture that is still intellectual and philosophical and politically active. It's very, very 19th century. If anything, the alignment of working class culture and working class interests with the kind of docile nature that we think of it today, where it's docile and respects the authority of the powerful and the state, is more linked to a post-World War II moment in which working class culture had been actively destroyed by the Depression and by World War II, and then rebuilt with media sources that are more controlled by the elites, like television and things like that. Why USA is so anti-science? There's a nut to crack in that. There's a whole thing about anti-intellectualism in American history. So there's that. There's a mistrust of intellectuals and experts. And not to mention, when science gets in the way of profits, there have been lots of money to fund propaganda campaigns to attack the science and sow doubt in the science. And that bleeds into other areas. It happened with climate change. It happened with cigarettes. It happened with sugar. It's happened with a bunch of stuff. It happened with radium. Would Europe have still ended up being a global power without the Roman Empire? A lot of conservative people justify imperialism by saying they spread civilization to us. I think not. So, if there's one thing the Roman Empire did for Europe, was spread Christianity very fast. Which I think that if you look at like colonization, the colonial mindset created by Christianity, the need to spread your religion, the need to convert, created like and also just the imperial mindset of Romans definitely bled into European culture, which led Europeans to think more that they can go to the other side of the world and exploit and conquest and take over, which is not something that the rest of the world necessarily embraced so heavily. And so I definitely think the imperial mindset that Rome put down through Christianity and through their imperial actions definitely paved the path for then, as Europe conquered the planet, becoming the most powerful region in the world. I would think that that's not a good thing, though. is Andrew Jackson to blame? I don't know if Andrew Jackson is to blame or if he is, if he just exploited that kind of like the era of good feelings and the Second Great Awakening and the kind of primacy of religion and religious interpretations of the world over scientific ones. Kind of comes from that period, but I think Andrew Jackson more used it than created it. Do you think a two-state solution to Israel and Palestine is still viable? Would it be more useful now to advocate for equal Palestinian rights within a greater Israel? Yeah, I think that a two-state solution is not feasible anymore. The two populations are too intertwined. And on top of that, any sort of two-state solution today would probably result in Palestine being given the worst of the territory. So I definitely would think that I'm back to one-state solution of Israel-Palestine or Palestine-Israel or whatever the hell you want to call it, with protections and a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, diverse, secular republic instead of a attempt to build a white Jewish ethno-state. All right. You have any more questions? We're running a bit low because I know that school starts this week for Americans, so maybe that's why it's a little quiet here. But I'm definitely willing to maybe answer one or two more, and then I really want to get to editing this video because it's going to be it's probably going to be a bit of a probably going to be an all-nighter tomorrow night getting it done. So I'd like to give myself as much time as possible. Gaddafi was an advocate for a one-state solution. That is true. Europe is a subcontinent of Asia. Eurasia is a Eurocentrist absurdism. We don't call it Indasia when India is included. Agree or disagree? Yeah, I think you're right on that. Why isn't Netanyahu a more fun person? He's literally got Yahoo in his name. Oh man, he's like one of the least fun people ever. Thoughts on Thomas Sankara? I've heard of him. I don't know that much about him. Okay. All right, I think it might be a good time to wrap up the stream. I think things are getting a little slow, and that's fine. Not every one of these streams has to be all the time, and I stream a lot. That if you have a question and you want to get it to me, you can definitely get it to me. I do 2 a week. I'll be back here next Monday, but at the same time, I'm doing a stream tomorrow night. So please, thank you for coming out. I'm very happy to have hung out with you guys. I know. Oh no, now I'm getting a question. Put a cork in that one, 255. Give it to me tomorrow. Yeah, I'm gonna go and edit some Shinto video. But yeah, friends, you have been awesome. And have an amazing day. Take care, everyone. Be good to each other.